The month of October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, a time to shed extra light on an issue that plagues our communities. Domestic violence affects all people, regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, or nationality. And sometimes it shows up in ways that you least expect. That's why it's important to have these conversations to break the cycle. The devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. Our first guest is part of the Violence Intervention Program, a Latinx led organization that helps victims of domestic violence find their way to safety physically, emotionally, and mentally. And services include a non residential program, a bilingual hotline, counseling, advocacy outreach, and more. And joining us to share more, we welcome Executive Director of the Violence Intervention Program, Margarita Guzmán. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Rena. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you for taking the time, and thank you for taking on this role. I did some background on you, and I understand that you also publicly identify as a domestic violence survivor.
I do.
Yeah. Well, guess what? So do I.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes. Yes, and it took me a very long time to be able to speak publicly about it without having breakdowns, right? Because I think one of the most important conversations that we need to have is the impact it has on our mental state and our emotional state, because I think people only identify it as a means of being, physically hurt. And so, without prying too much, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your background, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. What was interesting about my experience of domestic violence was that I think really often people talk a lot about how survivors of domestic violence have low self esteem and how that's a big part of what causes or leads them to be in abusive relationships. That was not my experience. And it took me so long to even recognize that I was in an abusive relationship because I was in a queer relationship. My partner was somebody who is a transgender man. And that did not register to me, right? Like I thought of domestic violence as man on woman violence,
Right.
cisgender man on cisgender woman. And it took a long time for me to realize, even though I identified as a feminist, even though I felt like I had the strongest sense of self esteem, that I was in fact in an abusive relationship. So I was with that person all through my experience of law school and in my first year of legal practice, and moved to New York to live with them. 1 year into it, a friend of mine finally said to me, "You know, this is abuse. You're in an abusive relationship." And it wasn't until he said that that I even understood that that applied to what I was living through, even though I really did understand domestic violence. So for me, it was a really interesting path towards learning that it really does affect everybody, that there's not just a sort of stereotypical relationship, not a stereotypical victim, and not a stereotypical abuser. So that was a little bit of what I went through. And you're right when you say that the mental health implications, that's the hardest part to get through, right? Bruises heal so much faster than emotional wounds do. And that has been one of the biggest journeys for my recovery, is learning how to reclaim my sense of self, my independence, and how to love myself again.
And we really appreciate your transparency here on air. And I really appreciate how you shared your accomplishments along the way as well, right? So you're a lawyer, and now you're the executive director of this massive national institution that is really geared towards the Latino or Latine, these terms nowadays, community,
all,
right?
all the
But
Latins.
right. And I say this to say that even though you're accomplished, you were still impacted by this, and then there becomes that question of like, well, what is it about myself that I didn't see that basically allowed this to be part of my normality,
Right.
right?
And because so many people expect it to be our fault,
Right.
the blame on the survivor is one of the biggest things that happens, and one of the biggest myths that I think we need to be able to break down.
Right, right. And so, what? I guess it compelled you to become the executive director of the Violence Intervention Program.
Yeah. Um, so when I was, before I worked for violence intervention program, I worked for the mayor's office to end domestic and gender-based violence. And my predecessor here, Cecilia Gaston, who led this organization for 10 incredible years, reached out to me and said, Mira, Margarita, I'm ready to retire. And I'm looking for other, like we need survivors to continue leading this organization. We want to make sure it's always led by Latina
Are we
survivors.
referring to
Um,
Cecilia Gaston?
I am. I
Yes.
am.
Yes, I received an award from VIP very many years ago in 2012. Like I'm in the fight with you. Is my point.
That's brilliant. Oh,
Yes.
I'm so glad. In fact, we renamed that award after she retired, the Cecilia Gaston Award, and we just honored Trinity Church Wall Street and Yale Center for Traumatic Stress and Recovery on Wednesday night. So you are in that brilliant and beautiful company, and they are in yours. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being
Thank you.
part of this
Of
fight
course.
for so long.
I think it's
Um,
important. It is so important. And obviously, I'm very passionate about it. So I'm very happy to meet you for the first time. I contribute in whatever way I can. I mean, I've done lots of speaking engagements, but really, where I stand now in this position, it's very important that we always shed light on the dynamics of it. Because again, there's this stigma of thinking that it's just it is miscommunication, but the miscommunication from having a physical outcome, when in fact it leads up to the physical outcome.
Right, right. And something important there that I think is it for identifying domestic violence,
Hmm.
because I think that a lot of people have been in unhealthy relationships, and a lot of people have been in even toxic relationships, but those are not necessarily abusive. If you are wondering whether you are in an abusive relationship or if you're around one, um, the question is whether over time somebody has power over you, right? And it doesn't mean that the person who's experiencing that doesn't fight back. It doesn't mean that there aren't experiences where the survivor acts out, but it does mean that in the long run, over time, there's one person who really does have power over and is lessening the other person's ability to make decisions and live their own life. So I think it's tricky, abusive, toxic, unhealthy, but that is the tipping point if somebody regularly has power over you.
Now, obviously, we know that VIP services those who are in need or are victims and survivors for that matter. However, are there any programs that are being offered right now to assist one with being proactive and preventative, if that's even such a thing, right? Because there is this mindfulness that I think we're all kind of like diving into right now based on the pandemics affecting all of us in a different way. I mean, this is separate, but this has amplified these particular situations. And so I just wondered if those type of programs are being initiated.
Yeah, that's such a great question. We've been asking ourselves a lot lately how we end the violence, right? How you stop cyclical violence and how you end, like you mentioned earlier, intergenerational cycles of violence. So one of the programs that we have at VIP and that I think is one that we have partnered with other organizations around is working with young people, right? Really, if you want to break cycles, you work with the young people who are going to be the next generation of leaders, of doers. And so we have a curriculum that really centers specifically Latinx immigrant youth in the concepts about like what gender is, what power and control are, consent, understanding the root causes of power, right? Like understanding what oppression looks like and feels like, and how that has an impact on domestic violence cycles. So our program is really focused, like you said, on Latina, Latino, Latinx, Latine youth so that they can see themselves in the examples that we're using. And there are many wonderful partners in this city who do a lot of youth work that center other identities. Girls for Gender Equity, Day One New York, these are all youth facing organizations that really are focused on the preventative work, and our contribution is the culturally specific work we do within Latinx community.
I love that. I love that. I love and thank you for sharing that, right? Because it does start there. It starts with educating the next generation into understanding, and you used a key word that I had to write down, and that is consent. Because consent is not, it isn't solely an act, it's a behavior,
Right.
right? But if you're not raised understanding what those boundaries are, right, and or you're subjected to certain things that, once again, as I mentioned earlier, creates a sense of normality, right? If there is such a thing, because I don't think any of us are normal. Really, it's a matter of boundaries. Really, it's a matter of boundaries and how you a quality of life. We'll say quality of life and a way in which one communicates.
Right, right, that's right. And we talk consent, you're right, it is a behavior. What we want to do is we want to make it a culture,
Right.
right? We want it to be part of our culture that
Yeah.
you would never think to put your hands on a person's body or
Right.
even comment on a body without that person indicating to you that that's what they want,
Right.
right? So having a culture of consent is something we're looking to build together.
I like that. That's wonderful language. It's soothing. It definitely invites wellness, right? And also dismantling with love in the forefront. A culture of consent. I love that. So we're talking about the culture of consent and I guess the consciousness of how to even recognize that you may be in a domestic violent relationship, because again, it comes in different forms. It comes in financial form, it comes in physical form, it comes in emotional form, it comes in mental form. But at the end of the day, it's a control factor. It's really a matter of understanding who you are and honoring yourself enough to know that this is not okay, right? So we didn't speak about the extreme portions of domestic violence, but I just, before we go, in conclusion, could you just share like how you're able to offer somebody who is in a real dire situation?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up because domestic violence homicides are up 15% this year from or in 2022 from 2021. So we know that this is an issue that still has the worst possible outcomes, which is loss of life. When somebody feels that they are in a situation where there's an imminent threat to bodily injury or even the loss of life, there are places to go. There are people available. And what you really want to do, one of the things that we offer is an emergency violence shelter. So we offer a safe refuge where single adults and parents with children can come and have a place to stay that is confidentially located. We have confidential locations throughout the city in regular apartment buildings. You wouldn't know that you're in a shelter necessarily because you go into a regular building. Um, we offer immediate crisis counseling on our helpline. So please do feel free to share that information, our helpline number, with your community. I'm going to share it right now if that's okay. Our helpline
Of
is 1
course,
800,
yes.
great, 1 800 664 5880. And we're open 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., Monday through Friday. There is also a citywide hotline that is 24 hours, and I'm gonna get that number for you right now. I have our number memorized. Let me make sure I get and that is I'm gonna pull it up while we're talking.
Uh-huh.
Some of the things that I think are really important if you're in a situation where you're really worried that something is escalating and you're in a physical space, I just want to offer some immediate things that somebody can do. Um, it's really important to make sure that if an argument is escalating, that you are thinking about the exits, right? Like it's really easy to find yourself cornered somewhere and you have nowhere to go, and very often the person who's being abusive is actually maybe even trying to get you in that corner so that there is not an opportunity for you to run out. Be mindful of where the exits are so that you can get out to them. Also, be sure that you can try to move the conversation outside of rooms like the kitchen or the bathroom. Those are the spaces where there's access to things that could easily become weapons and become fatal weapons at that. So try to maneuver outside of those spaces. And if you are in an ongoing situation, have people that you can reach out to, who can maybe come and get you, or who you can get to, or with one quick message, know that they need to call the police if the police are something that you think will be helpful for you. And having a sort of go bag is something that is always helpful, making sure that it's got your documents that you might need if you have a passport, birth certificates for your children, things that you want to make sure that you have with you if you ever need to run. And the New York City 24/7 hotline is 1 800 621 HOPE. So that's 1 800 621 4673.
All right, thank you so much. Wonderful tips. Thank you so much for that. Everyone, Margarita Guzmán, Executive Director of the Violence Intervention Program. And once again, we are speaking on domestic violence awareness. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or any threat of domestic violence, please call VIP's helpline at 1 800 664 5880. Representatives are on call, ready to assist you Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. Again, the city hotline is 1 800 621 HOPE. However, for more information on VIP services and resources, you can also visit vipmujeres.org. All right, stay tuned. There's more open when we return.